have some really good teachers to show you the ropes because it's not easy. Finally, to finish out this list, Boa Constructor is perhaps the most popular GUI builder. This one uses WX Python framework, which we learned about in the GUI Nugget in this series. Now, Visual TK-Enter, as I mentioned, and not in a spoken way, but I gave you one of my little annotation bubbles in the GUI Nugget. Visual TK-Enter is a wonderful idea. I just wish that it weren't so buggy and that it actually worked. Finally, there's Stanny's Python Editor, free, open source, SPE as it's known. A lot of folks are really big fans of it. Now let me show you some of these tools in action. I'm not going to give you the URLs of all of those IDEs. Quite honestly, you'd be just as well served opening up a Google search and looking for those names. However, before I show you some of these GUIs in action, I wanted to bring you out onto the web just for a moment to show you the Boa Constructor site, boaconstructor.sourceforge.net. If you're not familiar with sourceforge.net, this is a very popular, long-standing, community-driven website where you can host your software development products. In particular, these are open source, free software development products and projects. Therefore, if you're not familiar with SourceForge, make sure you get familiar because dollars to donuts, you'll be accessing SourceForge projects as modules perhaps or other add-ons to your Python. Boa Constructor, as we already said, is a GUI builder for Python, and I'm looking at their screenshots page where it gives us representative examples. Second place I want to show you is pythonide.blogspot.com. This, ironically enough, you don't think of a Blogger blog as being a project homepage, but it's where you can find Stanny's Python Editor. And he advertises it, free Python IDE for Windows, Mac, and Linux with UML, PyChecker, Debugger, GUI, Design, Blender, and more. There's a lot to it. There really is. This is Eclipse with the PyDev plugin installed. Easy way you can see that PyDev is installed is that we have a PyDev menu item. As I said earlier, the Eclipse application has a pretty steep learning curve. It's not for the faint of heart. Once you get Eclipse downloaded and run for the first time, you don't have the PyDev available. So what you have to do is open up Help, come down to Install New Software, and similarly to how you work with software repositories in Linux, you have to add a repository for PyDev. And I pointed it to pydev.org/updates. And then you can select the PyDev for Eclipse add-on, and there's also PyDev Myelin integration. And once you do that, you then are able to create a new PyDev project with associated modules and so on. I don't believe I showed you Visual TK-Enter in our GUI Nugget. I've downloaded it and installed it. It is such a great idea, friends. It's really wonderful. I mean, especially myself personally having experience with Visual Studio, I'm accustomed to this metaphor of the toolbox where you can literally just draw out your controls as you see here. And instead of worrying about pack and these other methods to align objects to your form, you can just drag and drop and use built-in alignment tools. Also, setting properties for those objects is just as easy as selecting the object and then coming over to the Properties window and making a change. In the actual code, you see that we have documentation already added. It gives you your imports right out of the box. It instantiates the form. You can change the window title right on the fly. And then as you add controls to the form, you'll notice that we get event handlers automatically created. Now those of you who are familiar with Visual Studio are thinking, well, big deal. But in Python, something like this is a great luxury. This is Komodo Edit, ActiveState's free version of their Komodo IDE. And a motif that you see in most of these IDEs, which I think is a great idea, is you have a multi-window interface. We notice that we can ping-pong among more than one Python script file at once. Boy, does that help in development. And also another feature that these IDEs have is that you can run your script in an interpreter that's embedded right into the IDE, as you see here. I like Komodo Edit personally a heck of a lot more than Eclipse. And as I said earlier, these IDEs almost always are multi-language. So if we go to File, New File, you'll notice that we have lots and lots of templates. Of course, we're interested in the Python template, but as you see, we can build TK files, TCL, Ruby, Perl, HTML even, Django, C, C++, etc. It's a pretty robust and well-rounded IDE for sure. This is NetBeans. I also am really big fan of NetBeans. This is a Java application. One thing that stands out to me about NetBeans is what you're seeing here with this little pop-up balloon. It's almost too easy to download updates for NetBeans and any plugins or extensions that you have into the IDE. That it's almost too easy to keep everything up to date. It's really cool. Those of you who are programmers or systems administrators who don't like to just download updates, you might want to go into Options or your plugins area and modify those settings. But definitely NetBeans out of the box wants to keep itself up to date. And we have a built-in environment here where we can run our code, as you see here. And if we go to create a new file, you'll see in the Python template list, we can create a Python executable module, a standard module, empty module, a Python package. We remember what packages are earlier in the course, and you can even create unit testing. So NetBeans is a good example of a well-rounded Python IDE that even includes testing built into it. Excellent, excellent platform. I love NetBeans. And last but not least, we have WingWare Wing IDE, the Python IDE. At first blush, you're probably thinking to yourself, whoa, there's a lot going on this screen. And that's true, but, and this is a big but, the main reason why I would recommend Wing IDE for you as a new student to Python above all the others is just how heavily and nicely documented Wing IDE is. For instance, you notice on your screen here I have the tutorial up that's walking us through configuring the environment, of which there's some work to do for sure. But if something goes wrong, you have remediation links. So in this part of the tutorial, we can make sure that we have our installed Python hooked in with the integrated development environment, you see. And again, you see down below, it's kind of difficult with my screen resolution set the way it is. We have a full-fledged interpreter. This is exactly what we would see if we ran Python from the command line. And as you see, we get our code help, our auto-completion, etc., and so on. Wing IDE, it's going to cost you some money to purchase a license, but in my opinion, it's very worth it. Python Frameworks and IDEs Review. In this nugget, we looked at a representative selection of Python web application frameworks. Therefore, this nugget, in combination with the one we did on GUI desktop development, ought to give you a great head start in learning to apply your newfound Python programming skills to real-world Python-based solutions. We then looked at IDEs, which for some programmers make life a lot easier, and I gave you again a smattering of what I consider to be the most popular of those IDEs, and I provided you with a little tour. Well, friends, we've reached the end of the road. It's been an absolute privilege and a joy being your guide and instructor through this series. I certainly hope that you enjoyed it. Please feel free to contact me by the given email address with any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, curiosities. I love interacting with my students. Thanks for purchasing this product. Thanks for hanging in there with me. And I hope that this has been informative for you. And I'd like to thank you again for viewing. Take care.